Welcome, everyone. I am Ajeck Mangut, and this is Africa Matters. Our trip across the continent begins in Burkina Faso, where militant attacks are forcing people to choose between physical safety and food. We'll speak to some of the thousands of people who've been driven from their homes by violent armed groups. We'll also take a look at how Russia is increasing its influence on the continent through weapons and trade. And then we'll take you to South Africa, where a shoe designer is giving international brands like Nike and Adidas a run for their money. This story isn't making headlines every day, but the people in the West African country of Burkina Faso are facing death, displacement, and hunger. Farmers say they have enough food back at their abandoned homes, but staying there means risking their lives. Others have to make a different but equally tough choice to either stay in a besieged area where they have been forced to survive on leaves, or walk for several days in search of food with little or no guarantee that they will get assistance from the government or even aid agencies. Francis Collings tells us more about what life is like for those who have recently been displaced.
This school is an oasis of hope for people targeted by a death squad. Their lives suddenly changed after a group of armed men stormed their village 2 months ago. They had no other option but to flee to safety at this school.
We were in the village growing millet. We saw people coming and shooting. They came to our house and shot at our children with guns. They took away our animals and burned our food stocks.
Ruamba is among dozens of women who found refuge in a nearby town. Unlike many, she's struggling to make ends meet.
We have nothing left. No house, not even a mat to lie on. We have no clothes to cover ourselves, and the pots you see are given to us by the people of the village.
At least 480 civilians have been killed since April in a wave of attacks carried out by a group linked to Al-Qaeda and Daesh. UN peacekeeping forces have been deployed to the region, but they struggle to quell the violence. Aid agencies warn an average of 13,000 people are on the move every week due to a deteriorating security crisis. Local officials say they're also struggling to handle the situation.
Every day, people come to me and tell me to ask the government for more help. We are told to be patient, that there is nothing at the moment, and if there is, they will call us.
Many of these people want to go back to their homes but fear retaliation. The failure to address their urgent needs leaves them with an impossible choice: to stay safe or risk their lives for food. Francis Collings, TRT World.
Dr. Ajeck Mangut is the head of the Norwegian Refugee Council in Burkina Faso. He joins me from the capital, Ouagadougou. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Mangut, where are all the displaced people ending up? And what kind of support are they getting from the government or aid agencies?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Most of the IDPs, the people in displacement, they end up in the areas where they think they feel safer and where there's some sense of security. And if you look at the geographical setup of Burkina Faso, bordering Mali and Niger, those borders are a little bit porous. So that's where most of the attacks occur, and the people, they seem to run away deeper into the other parts of Burkina Faso. So in terms of the humanitarian assistance, we are trying our level best as humanitarian actors to provide assistance in terms of food, water, sanitation, health, and also protection through protection monitoring and reporting, and working with the government to ensure that at least we advocate for protection of those people that are in displacement. But what we are seeing now is that due to the challenges that we have in terms of funding, the challenges we have in terms of the capacity to quickly register those people, we are playing a catch-up game where we are saying we are not keeping abreast with the displacement. This is also due to the challenges we have in funding. For example, this year, we only received 1/4 of the total appeal money of more than 600 million.
You know, we're also hearing about looming food shortages because violent attacks have kept farmers from planting. What is being done to improve the security of the people there? I know you're working on aid and all, but these people need to also be able to sustain themselves.
Yeah, this is the biggest challenge that we are also observing, because most of the people that are in displacement, they are willing to go back and do their farming. For example, this year, the rains are very good in Burkina Faso, but access to those fields is a challenge. Most of the people, some of the people that have gone back, they quickly run back again because they are facing attacks, repeated attacks in their villages, so they could not continue doing their farming. But we are also seeing where the government has tried to put in place the voluntary defense forces that are supporting the military. We are also seeing that as well, though they are trying to do that, but it has not helped much, because we are observing that maybe the armed groups, they are more power, they are much more, they have they are well equipped, and they can also, attack these VDPs that are in the local villages, and they expel them very easily. So it's a big challenge. So the food crisis for this year, it's not because the rains were bad, but it's because the people cannot go back and do their farming, because they can't access those areas because of the armed group presence.
Dr. Mangundu, let's talk about how the government is handling this crisis. President Christian Kabore recently sacked the Ministers of Defense and Security in response to the attacks. Has the cabinet reshuffle helped reduce the violent attacks, do you think?
Some of those things, maybe I cannot comment, but we are saying, if you look at the scale up of the repeated attacks that are occurring, maybe there's something that even the international community needs to do to support. We are saying, if all of us, we are committed to providing humanitarian response, providing development in those marginalized areas, then maybe all of us will contribute towards peace.
Right. I know my directors are saying that we should wrap this up, but let me quickly ask you, why do you think this story has gone largely unnoticed? How do you lose 500 people in a couple of weeks and it's really not making the headlines as it ought to?
Yeah, I think if you look at the way it started developing in Burkina Faso has been relatively calm, and everybody was taken by surprise when this humanitarian crisis started evolving. There was no much talking about the crisis here, because it was being overshadowed by other huge humanitarian crises in Syria, in DRC, in Yemen, and I think the visibility in terms of the human crisis was not well covered in Burkina Faso.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ajeck Mangut, the head of the Norwegian Refugee Council in Burkina Faso. Thank you so much for your insight. Let's take a look at some other stories now. This week, reports of an imminent Russian mercenary deal in Mali rang alarm bells in both France and Germany. Russia's military presence on the African continent has grown steadily in the last 5 years, and that's because it has become the main supplier of arms to Africa, accounting for 35% of arms exports to the region. It is an attractive option for African countries battling homegrown armed insurgents just because they are relatively cheap, and deals with Russia are not often tied to human rights concerns. At least 20 African countries have signed military cooperation agreements with Russia since 2015, including Sudan, Ethiopia, Angola, and Equatorial Guinea. And now it's targeting countries battling terrorism in the Sahel region like Nigeria, Chad, and Burkina Faso. Most recently, the military junta in Mali has reportedly been in negotiations and is close to striking a deal allowing Russian mercenaries to operate in the country, as Claire Herriot reports.
From Libya in the north to Nigeria in the west, and from Ethiopia in the east to Mozambique in the south, Russia is expanding its influence in Africa. And now, the Wagner Group, a clandestine force of Russian mercenaries with direct links to the Kremlin, is reported to be close to a deal with the military junta in Mali. And those angry at France's military presence in the country are excited.
I would like to inform national and international opinion that Wagner is the same as the Russian army. The Russian army is the same as Wagner. If Wagner went to liberate Syria, if Wagner went to liberate the Central African Republic, then we welcome Wagner to Bamako to liberate Mali.
A lot of African governments feel that they've been neglected by their Western partners, by France, by the United States. Putin sees an opportunity there. Don't forget also, there's money involved.
A lot of money. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute estimates that Africa accounted for 18% of Russian arms exports over the past 4 years. There's money to be made in industry too. State-owned Russian companies have been mining bauxite in Guinea. All of this makes France, the former colonial ruler in much of West Africa, nervous. Paris, along with Berlin, is hoping a diplomatic drive will prevent the latest deal with Wagner from going ahead. It might be too little, too late.
It is not a secret that the French already shrinking in this region. They will act only if the Russia is become more danger for the core interest of France.
But Russian boots are already on the ground, and Europe is worried it's being outmanoeuvred now that President Putin has set his sights on Africa. Claire Herriot, TRT World.
David Otto is an African security analyst, and he says Russia's growing influence could be tied to its need for resources and new markets.
What is happening now is that the tables are being turned, because of course most African countries are getting really fed up with the influence that countries like France do have in the continent, especially if we're talking about the Sahel, the Central African Republic, but also states within the Central Africa as a region. So it's becoming, a very competitive ground. One could liken that to the, Scramble for Africa 2.0. But this time, Russia is very much involved, especially in terms of its military might. It is providing an alternative in terms of security, but in a very different form, because it doesn't involve itself in, regime change. It actually protects regimes, that are being threatened all over the world, from, regime change policies by the Western capitalist states. So we are increasingly seeing the vulnerability of the Western influence in Africa, through countries like Russia. And then we're also seeing, countries like Turkey getting involved. So it's a big change for the West, in this sense.
We have more stories coming up here on Africa Matters. We will take a look at the challenges faced by women with hearing challenges in some African countries. And one rhino breeder believes he has a solution to Africa's poaching crisis, and it's not what you might think. Right now, the whole world is battling COVID-19, but it's not the same battle in every country. Some have argued that African countries don't need vaccine doses urgently because they have fewer cases and lower death tolls compared to others. But John Nkengasong from the Africa Centers for Disease Control says it's likely that those numbers are unreliable. More than 200,000 COVID deaths have been officially reported on the continent, but half of the countries lack enough data to track the cases effectively. In Nigeria, what should be a time of joy turns into tragedy for many women. 1 in every 20 mothers dies either while giving birth or during pregnancy. Navigating the dangers of childbirth is even more challenging for those with disabilities. But an NGO in Abuja is helping to make their voices heard, as Ajeck Mangut tells us.
Helen Beyoko Alase runs the Deaf Women Aloud Initiative, a non-profit organization that helps ensure access to health services for hearing-impaired women. The activist and motivational speaker started operation after almost losing her first child in 2011. She is deaf and says medical staff did not properly attend to her during labor because of communication difficulties.
I went to the hospital to register for prenatal care. The attitude of the nurse was terrible. I told her I was deaf and pregnant, but she dismissed me. When I was in labor, nurses did not really attend to me, and I was crying and in pain. They left me for hours.
According to the World Health Organization, a Nigerian woman has a 1 in 22 risk over her lifetime of dying during pregnancy, childbirth, or complications after delivery or an abortion. In the most developed countries, that risk is far lower, at 1 in almost 5,000. The high mortality rate in Nigeria is partly due to problems with receiving skilled prenatal care. For those with disabilities, getting such care can be even harder. Mansurat Abdul Wasiu is hearing impaired and says difficulty communicating makes prenatal checkups longer and less helpful than they should be.
One of the most challenging things for me was when I would go for prenatal care as early as 6:45 a.m., I would notice that the people who would come after me would be attended to before me, because when they called my number, I didn't hear them.
The UN says people with disabilities are one of the most excluded groups in society, often missing out on basic education, employment and services. Under a plan to achieve sustainable development by 2030, the UN's 153 member states pledged to ensure that no one is left behind.
The Deaf Women Aloud initiative has trained interpreters and medical practitioners and sent them across Abuja to bridge the communication gap.
We have trained healthcare providers on basic sign language with support from the American Embassy to help make communication easy between the deaf patient and healthcare providers. We have developed a glossary that a deaf person and a health expert can go through if there is no interpreter, and we hope to train more on access to healthcare services.
Helen's organization hopes to make a real difference for vulnerable women and girls. Ajeck Mangut, TRT World, Abuja.
And now for a roundup of what's making news across the continent. West Africa's economic body, ECOWAS, has imposed tough sanctions on the military junta in Guinea. The sanctions include freezing of funds and assets and a travel ban on junta members and their families. It's also imposed a 6-month deadline for the military to hand over power to a civilian government. Some opposition parties welcomed the removal of Alpha Condé and his government, but aren't confident that the military will give up its newfound power anytime soon. Young people from the Tigray region of northern Ethiopia say they are planning to write 5 million letters to US President Joe Biden. They plan to flood the White House with letters describing their experiences during the 10-month war between the federal government and Tigrayan rebels. An estimated 50,000 civilians have been killed and 2 million people have been displaced by this conflict. And trade between Turkish and African companies has increased tenfold in the past 2 decades. The Turkish government dubbed 2020 the Year of Africa, but the pandemic forced most of the associated events online. Now, most of these restrictions have been lifted, and representatives of hundreds of African firms have been meeting their Turkish counterparts in Istanbul for the World Corporation Industries Forum to talk trade and investment. And there's a glimmer of hope for Nigerian Twitter users. The government banned the social media platform more than 100 days ago after it removed a tweet by President Muhammadu Buhari. But the information minister says the suspension should be lifted within days. Some people have managed to get around the ban by using VPNs, but Nigerian businesses say it's cost them more than $300 million. Students, motor taxi drivers, and residents of the Togolese capital, Lomé, are rushing to get COVID-19 shots. That's because the government has banned access to some public buildings for the unvaccinated. Hospital staff say they are vaccinating at least 600 people every day, but supply is likely to become a problem since the country has received only 1.6 million doses for its 8 million people. Now, let's take you to South Africa, where an entrepreneur has drawn inspiration from his humble roots in the township to create sneakers that rival global brands. Matuba Mahlatjie reports.
Theo Baloyi sold his first pair of Bathu sneakers 5 years ago from the boot of his car. Today, his company, Bathu, employs more than 200 people. He's one of the most celebrated entrepreneurs in South Africa, but says the most fulfilling part of his job is giving back to the community.
Ours is to be of service, directly and indirectly, to our communities. Our lives should have impact in other people's lives, and those people's lives should also, their lives should also have an impact in other people's lives.
The 32-year-old identified a gap in the sneaker market and launched Bathu, which means shoe in township slang. It's now become one of Brand Africa's top 10 most admired brands because of its youthful designs that sell for about $45, making it affordable for many customers who can also order a customized pair for themselves.
I had to take my own, savings and use them as seed capital into the business and build the value chain end to end, with the sole aim to reignite hope and create sustainable jobs.
5 years after its founding, Bathu employs 220 people, has a 4,000 square meter warehouse, and has 27 stores across South Africa. But COVID-19 pandemic has thrown a curveball to many businesses. And in the past month, South Africa saw the worst looting and violence since the end of apartheid 27 years ago. So far, Bathu has weathered the storm.
We managed to sustain the business because when we started the first 2 years, we didn't have a lot of expenses. We were just an online business. That helped us build the working capital so that when COVID came, we could sustain the business. It was like we always sort of knew that in year 3, year 4, we're going to have something called COVID, and it's going to have great impact in the retail sector and the economy.
Baloyi makes a point of employing people from his home township. 80% of his workforce come from Alexandra, and they love it here.
It's one of those crazy places you'd wish to be each and every day for life. Waking up in the morning, you'll just say, you know what, I'm going to the office, I want to see the guys, I want to see Queen Lou, I want to see Mr. Baloyi, I want to see Andrew, I want to see who. Because of it is actually a young, vibrant kind of a place.
The metaphor of a journey of 1,000 miles starting with just one step could not describe Theo Baloyi's story better. After years of starting his own company, he's now walking that journey in the shoes made from his own factory. And that factory is a source of hope for 220 young people that he employs. Matuba Mahlatjie, Alexandra Township, South Africa.
We'll stay in South Africa for our final story. The country is home to the world's largest population of rhinos. But over the past decade, poaching has threatened the animals. Local authorities have been trying to protect them. And as Jaffa Hasnan reports, one breeder believes he has a solution.
On this farm in South Africa's northwest, rhino are being hunted to save their lives. They're chased down in vehicles, darted, and their horns surgically removed. The thought behind this strategy is without their valuable horns, they are no longer attractive to poachers.
For us, it's a safety measure, so it acts as a poaching deterrent. Because we have such a vast amount of rhino at the project.
60 years ago, the southern white rhino was on the brink of extinction. Today, John Hume is the largest private breeder in South Africa with nearly 2,000 rhino. He says cameras and radars have helped keep poachers away for 4.5 years. But it comes at a cost. Every month, Hume spends more than $350,000 to feed and protect his rhino. And money is running out. Hume believes the animals could pay for themselves.
So if I had my government to help me, to assist me, to export my production of live rhino, to export rhino horn, or to start a processing plate here where we process rhino horn into jewelry or medicine.
Rhino horns are used in traditional Chinese medicine and are seen as a status symbol in other parts of Asia. Hume argues that if they were harvested and sold legally, poaching would decline. But the South African government disagrees.
I have been battling to export some rhinos to Vietnam for years, and the government just finds a way to block me all the time instead of helping me.
Internationally, the commercial trade of rhino is prohibited. But despite the ban, authorities say poaching in South Africa has risen 50% in the first half of this year. Hume fears unless new and creative ways are found to protect rhino, they will disappear from the savannas forever. Jafar Hasnan, TRT World.
That's our show this week. We combed through the continent to bring you those stories, so please share your thoughts and suggestions on Twitter using the hashtag #AfricaMatters. Or you can reach out to me on my personal handle @AdeshowaJosh if you have any stories you'd like us to tell. For now, we'll leave you with these beautiful pictures from across the continent. I'll see you next time.